All right, this is Guillermo Mash here, and it's my distinct pleasure. I have in the physical studio Jennifer Haffner here from Chico, Northern California Legal Services. And it's my distinct pleasure to have Paul Boden, someone I've known from afar now, going on 4 years, out of Western Regional Advocacy Project in San Francisco. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, starting with Jennifer. Just kind of give an introduction of who you are and why you're glad to be here in the studio today.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. My name is Jennifer Haffner, and I'm the managing attorney of the Chico Office of Legal Services of Northern California. Our goal and our mission is an anti-poverty mission and working with low-income individuals, whether they're housed or not. We do a lot of policy work, housing advocacy. I know we're here to discuss housing, but we also assist in public benefits issues and Medi-Cal and Social Security, all of these issues that really affect low-income folks. So I am definitely happy to be here, as we have a lot of clients that can be affected by these ordinances that we're here to talk about.
What about you, Paul Boden, San Francisco?
Yeah, Paul Bowden, and I came up off the streets in New York and here in San Francisco way back. I'm old, back in the 80s, and worked in homeless programs here for a bunch of years. Was part of the Coalition on Homelessness in San Francisco, and now I'm working with community organizations throughout the West Coast and Denver, and consolidating our work and bringing our skills together and really having from the streets, but not just homeless people. Like Jennifer said, these are all issues of poverty and social justice and public housing and SRO residents and welfare recipients and just the immigrant rights community folks, and really trying to build a social justice coalition that encompasses all of us and brings us all together. We just happen to be the people that are launching it, and we happen to come from the homeless community. But it's really a broad community-wide effort.
You know, actually, I'm gonna pause real fast, and I'm gonna actually, apologize to Jennifer, because I was gonna gift you something that came to me in the mail from Paul Boden, and it was the book that Rap put together called "House Keys, Not Handcuffs." And all I want to say about that book, Paul, I know I sent you a message on this, but yeah, I was freaking down in the dumps, dude. This work is difficult, being out there in the trenches and seeing what's happened to these folks. But that book that you put together with the artwork from Rap and just all of the insights of what the struggle's been, and it really gave a beautiful picture of what it's like to be homeless. It lifted me up, dude. It made me feel a lot better, and it gave me a lot more hope, and it made me, have a bigger spring in my step for weeks on end. So I just wanted to thank you for gifting that to me, and maybe spend a minute or two talking about that book you put together.
And you're very, very welcome. Actually, after this show, we're going to go pick up 500 more books from the printer.
Yeah.
Because we sold out the first 700 copies of it. So it was written because a lot of, because I'm old, I've been around a long time. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I hate to see people as they're starting projects make the same mistakes I made. I want them to make new mistakes and learn from those mistakes. But it's crazy to see how many of us coming up from the streets and we're starting stuff. We're making mistakes that 100 other groups made before us, and we're doing it again. And so I work with groups a lot about, well, here's the stuff that we learned. Here's the mistakes we made. Here's the stuff we did right. And here's the spirit that we were operating in. And I think that's why artists are attracted to our work. And, there is a spiritual aspect to it, and it's not freaking religious. It's just work from the heart.
Yeah.
And that comes from experience. And I was really fortunate when I was coming up off the streets in the early 80s. Homelessness wasn't an industry yet. You didn't have the freaking National Alliance to End Homelessness and the Corporation for Supportive Housing Groups that redefined family homelessness. You had people that were in crisis in the community that was trying to respond to that crisis. And it was our crisis. Now we've gotten so institutionalized, and you see this in welfare. You see this in other systems, public housing. They become institutions and bureaucracies, and the spirit of why public housing was created in the first place gets lost. So I always woof about that and always talk about that. And somebody, convinced me on my 30th anniversary of doing this work, you need to write it down. So I shared it as a draft with several groups, Denver Homeless Out Loud and some other groups that I was working with as they were developing their stuff. And they said it would have been really helpful to see when they were first starting out, had I not been talking to them, that had they seen this book, the early drafts of it, that it would have helped them out to see the artist, essay from Art Hazelwood about the artwork and the essay from Bob Prentice about the impact on government, and then my woofing at the beginning about just what we were trying to do. I said, okay, then this publisher offered to print it, and here we are.
Awesome, Paul. Because you had a nice way to kind of frame what I said, and I'll restate it in a way. It really gave me a lot of peace because I'm looking at going, I did that. I saw that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, you know what I mean? Because you're following in the same footsteps. So why don't I turn it over to Jennifer Haffner here and talk about what these new ordinances are and what the impact is on the roofless community or folks that are downtown.
Well, I think this started 2 years ago when the first sit-lie ordinance, as it's known, passed. I want to say it was in 2013. And that's when it really, I think, first started. This issue has been around for a long time, of course, but I think it's really when our community started to make a push about, let's start putting something on the books. We're tired of seeing this. We're tired of this activity, this lawlessness, and we need to do something about it. And the let's do something about it wasn't what are the services, what is causing homelessness, why do we have this issue? It was what can we do to get these people out of our community or so we don't see these people in our community. And of course, that is not how everyone would frame what these ordinances are. But what the gist of it is that it is putting laws in place that put restrictions on where you can sit in public, where you can sleep in public, where you're allowed to be, criminalizing issues that a lot of people would argue are just basic necessities of life. And so we had the sit-lie ordinance that passed, and then most recently, there was another ordinance that sort of expanded the sit-lie ordinance, and now that included a whole section on waterways. So a lot of the parks that weren't included before, streams, they outline anything that touches water is pretty much included in this, as well as more public places. And then the storage of personal property was something that was added in this most recent one. It's just kind of been this trend, as I feel, in our community that, we're moving towards putting more laws on the books. And a big problem is that this new ordinance, I should say, includes that there's discretion for an officer to now make it a misdemeanor, whereas before it was just an infraction, but now there's the discretion of a police officer to make it a misdemeanor and bring in the whole issue of it's possible you could be arrested, taken down to the police station. It rises it to a whole new level with this discretion in the new ordinance.
That was a really good point you made, Jennifer. Not everyone would agree with what the perception of the ordinance is, but boy, when I talk to people that are affected by it, that's a pretty consistent message I get. And I mean that people that are affected physically trying to survive, that are just out there sleeping and trying to find a place to exist. Now, what could you say about the ordinances in general from the work you've done in different communities, Paul? Does it seem similar to what's going on in other places?
Yeah, the whole reason for creating RAP was because a bunch of local organizations all recognized that we're all dealing with the same issues. And the two most constant is the lack of access to affordable housing and the dismantling of our public housing system, and the criminalization of the presence of poor people in communities where they're no longer welcome. And we immediately went out, talked to 1,400 homeless people in 5 states, and documented their responses to a survey that we created that's now happening nationally, by the way, as part of the National Coalition, National Law Center stuff. And the top 3 criminal offenses that SRO residents and homeless people and just community members that are poor reported experiencing was 81% had been harassed, cited, or arrested for sleeping, 78% for sitting or laying down on a sidewalk, and 66% for loitering, or what we consider standing still or hanging out in your neighborhood. They criminalize as loitering. So sleeping, sitting, and standing still are the top 3 criminal offenses that people are being harassed, cited, and charged with. And really, when you think about it, since when is sitting, standing, and sleeping a freaking crime?
Yeah, it's not. They're trying to make it look like it is. I would add a little color, a little bit on that outline of the impact on the ruthless. There's a young woman that I help that actually is on the streets, been on the street for 14 years. But here's the short story for her. She got kicked out of her home because she was mentally ill. The parents just kind of kicked her to her curb. She's been homeless since she's a teenager, Paul. And you know what she was saying to me the other day? I had to actually ask her to leave a place that she was at because I had to go and I couldn't be there. But it was so heart-wrenching. She's like, I'm just sick and tired of being told I can't sleep anywhere. They're coming under the bridge and they're waking me up at 2 a.m. She says, I haven't got enough sleep. I don't even know who I am. I haven't had enough sleep. And I'm seeing a lot more of that in Chico. There's a lot more of this people that are, they're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, because literally the police are going underneath bridges in the middle of the night, waking people up and telling them to move.
And the irony is,
it's insanity.
People are being forced to hide from the system that was created to protect us all. Police were created to protect the citizens. And instead, we have a certain number of people, a segment of our community, that literally has to hide from those that are sworn to protect them. And that's because we're making their mere presence a crime.
Yeah, I would like to add to that too. And a lot of the problems with these laws is that I think it's coming from the side of the people that are proponents of these ordinances. They say this is not about homeless people. This is not about people that don't have places to live. This is about conduct. But really, really, when it gets down to it, is that it's not conduct, it's your mere status. The fact that you don't have a home. It's not about particular conduct. And I think that's where the problem is that just the mere fact of not having a home puts you in violation of many of these ordinances. And I think that's part of the problem too. It really is criminalizing the fact that you exist and that you don't have a home.
Well, and you know what's funny, Jennifer, is if you look at it, the only conduct that somebody targeted by these laws can conduct without being charged with a criminal offense, because sitting, standing, and laying down are all criminal offenses. The only thing people can do legally is walk. So long as poor or homeless people, people of color, immigrant community members, so long as we keep walking, they're okay with our presence. Mm-hmm. But as soon as we stand still, as soon as we sit down, as soon as we lay down, as soon as we try to eat, our conduct is criminal activity. Right. And yet every single person, at some point is going to stand still, sit down, sleep, and eat. Your body's going to and go to the bathroom, frankly, just by virtue of the fact that your body is going to make you do those things at some point, at some time. Yeah, and if you do them and you're homeless, you're breaking the law.
Yeah, I think another thing I would add to add a little color to it from interviews I've done is a more recent one I haven't aired yet was from a teenager, and she was actually 16, 17, homeless runaway, but she had some really powerful words around the fact that she's forced out of areas where she would normally sleep, like downtown, someplace where there's lights, someplace where she felt safer, and she's forced into these areas, and the areas are becoming less and less and less, where she's in danger. So physically these laws, especially if you're a woman, struggling with, I can't even imagine, Paul, being a woman being homeless. I can't, and I've talked to hundreds of them, but they're actually forcing people into unsafe situations. And as a community citizen here at Chico, I'm a little peeved. They keep talking about the health and safety of the community, and we're going to cut community policing. I can't find any homeless people that think that they've been talked to by the police about what it would be that the police could do to make them safer and make their life a lot more, ability to exist in Chico. It's like we're talking about here. The underlying thing is we want you gone, we want you out of sight, and it's sad.
And we did a lot of research looking at the Basurero Treaty, the anti-Okie laws, the Jim Crow laws, the sundown towns, the ugly laws. Unfortunately, the list is really long. The Japanese American Exclusion Act. I mean, this country has a long documented history of having the power of local government pass local ordinances to criminalize the presence of people that they want to get rid of. Mm-hmm. We've got a documented history of it, and it's not that long ago that we were still doing this on a regular basis. And yet, here we are again. And this is what it felt like for people as Jim Crow was really kicking in, as anti-Okie laws were kicking in. There's all of this paranoia and fear, and they're from somewhere else. They're not like us. When you see articles about homeless people, they inevitably mention urine, feces, hypodermic needles, from somewhere else, crazy, nuisance. Like, these are all words that are locked into the general public's head from local government and from local business leaders, that this isn't us, this is them.
Right.
And in order to have laws like these on the books and have these laws being enforced, imagine if everybody in our community was ticketed, harassed, and arrested for standing still or for sitting down. Like, we know that's not going to happen. We know that is never going to happen. These laws wouldn't last 5 minutes on the books. But because it's them and I fear them, well, then it's okay.
Maybe I'll toss this out there, maybe get to you, Jennifer, and then a follow-up with Paul. But I went to the way they set up the ordinance in 2013. They had a 6-month review, and they came back. It was all police-driven. There was really no homeless input. It was police, downtown beach, DCBA. I know you've been in a lot of these meetings. But what really concerned me as a citizen, and I got up there and I spoke my words, is the police, and they've said it even in press releases on this one, these new ordinances allow us to approach people and to question them than when we wouldn't normally have had to approach them and questioning them. And I'm sitting there going, well, all they're doing is sitting on the sidewalk, and now all they're doing is sitting by a creek. I mean, what kind of community do we have where the police can pretty much say, there's somebody sitting, let's go over there and see if they're a criminal or see what they're up to? I mean, that just is not a safe and a warm community. And I question whether that's a legal application of physical criminal law to be targeting people physically for sitting. You know?
Right. What I would say to that is part of definitely our concern from legal services perspective when you look at the ordinance, is that when I talked about earlier that there's now this discretion, and that at the council meetings when they were talking about this, there was input from police and officers saying, you know, we want the discretion because really this is not what we don't want to send people, we don't want to cite them, we really just want the opportunity to be able to talk to them and offer them services, and that's really what we would prefer to do. The problem is that is not what the ordinance says. The ordinance doesn't say First, we're going to offer services. Second, we are going to see if we can help them find housing. I mean, it says you have a misdemeanor or it can be an infraction. And so the concern is that the discretion is the problem, because that way then it could be applied discriminatorily. Are they asking college kids who are lying down with their backpack, what are you doing? Or are they asking the homeless person lying down with their backpack, what are you doing? And so even if we want to believe in, and I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not true, because I have had decent experiences with officers, and I do feel that people care, but the fact that there's the discretion is the problem. We can't just trust that that's always going to be handled properly in an even-handed way, and so I feel that is a real problem when there is that kind of discretion, like you're saying, who really is being approached with these issues.
I think they are lying. You know, I think the cops know darn well, and I know local government knows well, you don't need an ordinance to talk to somebody. Outreach workers talk to homeless people all the time. Homeless people talk to homeless. Cops talk to homeless people. Anybody can talk to anybody. And you don't need to pass an ordinance in order to empower anybody to talk to anybody else. You only need an ordinance to criminalize. And so when any of them, I don't care if it's a nice cop or not, when any of them say, well, we need this in order to, you're lying. You're straight up lying, and you know it. And unfortunately, the track record is you're going to get away with it, but it's a lie. And just because we no longer put signs on the front of our towns like Rosewood, California did back in the old days that said, hey, Jap, get out of Rosewood is a white man's town. Keep walking. You know, just because you're not doing that doesn't mean that you're not doing the same exact thing as the sundown towns did, as the Jim Crow laws did, or as the anti-Okie laws did. You're just implementing it in a different methodology against a different group of people, but it's the same exact thing, and you know it. Right. You know you don't need an ordinance to talk to a homeless person and say, hey, brother, or hey, sister, can I help you out?
Yeah, and then all the lies apply that they could respond in kind of if
or
they
not.
would like to. But the thing I maybe get a little bit of conversation around this point that really upsets me as an advocate, Paul, is like all these buzzwords. We're going to offer them services, and we're going to talk to them, and we're going to find them housing. We're going to do this and that. That's all BS, because there's nowhere near enough services here. I don't know a place in the country that has 100% service coverage for anyone that doesn't have the income or the means to get into a house. So
well, and that's why these laws
way.
weren't on the books before 1983 as targeted towards homeless people. When people had alternative to sleeping in the streets, i.e. before the cuts from Reagan, and that's why we did the Without Housing report on our website, you know, the cause and effect of the equivalent of $54 billion a year cuts to affordable housing programs from 79 to 83, and the opening of our emergency shelter programs in 83 is a direct correlation. And when people had an alternative to sleeping in alleys, to sleeping out in the streets, to going to the bathroom in the woods or the bushes or in an alley street, when people had alternatives to that lifestyle, they chose it. And our parks were open 24 hours a day. And we didn't have business improvement districts in every other freaking what we used to call neighborhoods.
Well, I think that's also a good segue to say that, and here we are, we've been talking about this for 22 minutes, and we're still talking about the ordinances and the criminalization and what's going on, but we're not talking about where's our affordable housing, what are other alternatives, what is, this is now taking the city council's time, the city attorney's time, tax dollar time on focusing on ordinances and not focusing on what can really solve the problem, because the ordinances aren't going to solve the problem. And it's definitely said we know that this isn't a panacea, this isn't going to solve the problem, but these are the only steps that are being taken. And so really what is our organization would like to see, well, let's move into the direction of looking at what actually solves the problem and looking at our affordable housing crisis and looking at services and the crisis we have on behavioral health services, all of these issues that really address the problem other than spending our time talking about a remedy that isn't really a remedy at all.
And again, that's where history teaches us a really decent lesson, because one of the documents we use, one of the posters we use in our Without Housing stuff is from the Mayor LaGuardia of the city of New York in 1936 with all these images of homelessness and poverty, and says, "Must we always have this?" and a giant question mark. And then under that it says, "Why not housing?" That was funded by the WPA, hired local artists to create it, and put out by the mayor of New York City, pushing for what in 1937 finally passed, and what today we call HUD. And the creation of HUD came out of the massive homelessness during the Depression and the health issues in tenement housing, just like there's health issues in being homeless, and was local governments, and there was some serious organizing going on, pushing the federal government to create what today we're dismantling, and that's public housing. And that's why homelessness has reemerged, because what was created to address it was dismantled, and so of course it reemerged. It's cause and effect. It makes perfect sense it reemerged, because the institution that was created to resolve it when it happened before has been decimated to the point of being useless.
I actually went in front of the city council, Paul. You've already seen this graph, but it's a scary graph. I call it the shark graph. It looks at the dip in affordable housing down and to the right, and the actual building of prison cells up and to the right. So literally, you can look at this going, by looking at this graph, we're no longer building affordable housing, but we're building prison cells at an alarmingly fast rate, the largest prison population in the world. But that's just sending a message that our government has said, look, we don't need a place to house these people. They need to be in jail. And now you've got Chico and surrounds and other communities coming up with different ways they can write misdemeanors and failures to appear to put these people in jail cells instead of putting them into housing.
Well, also there's a lot of corporate money that's made in building jails and now running jails and prisons. There's very little corporate money that's made in developing affordable housing for poor people. So the priority is to generate revenue for corporate America, and so those are the institutions, public schools and building universities, way down. Building public housing, way down. Access to free health care, way down. And yet, massive increases in luxury condos, luxury housing, downtown development, and prisons and jails.
I'm going to swing back to what Jennifer said, because we really do need to start pushing the envelope and moving the football on getting affordable housing. So actually, when I looked at this whole thing, Jennifer, and I didn't go to the city council meeting, I'm like, look, maybe at some point when the dust settles, why can't we go to city council and maybe the Butte County itself and just get the different service providers and people working on this to actually write some sort of powerful letter or some sort of thing that goes to the government saying, look, we have a freaking problem. We need more housing. But I don't see that ever happening. The only thing that ever happens, like you had said, Jennifer, we criminalize it, we move on to the next thing. No one ever stops and goes, maybe as a community, if we had a larger voice saying this is enough. And I remember you, Paul, actually, in one of your, either the book or one of your interviews I'd heard on you, you're kind of like, a lot of the local governments are just getting fed up with the fact that the government's not building enough housing, and they're taking it into their own guise of how to deal with it, and they're dealing with it with police officers in prison cells.
Well, they're going where the money is. They're not getting the money for affordable housing, but they're getting money for increased policing. Yep. They're getting money for development of arenas downtown and the Google stuff that's happening in San Francisco. I mean, that's where the money is, so that's where they're going, because neoliberal economics rules all.
Well, I do want to say that here in Chico at that city council meeting, and I didn't write the numbers down, and I did see a newspaper article that said, about half of the people that spoke were in favor and half of the people that spoke were not. So there is a large percentage of people that want the affordable housing. And I agree with you, Bill, that, let's as a community focus on what can actually solve the problem. And we have great organizations here in Chico that are really trying to work on this. And some of the local ones have been asking for many years now to say, we want to build affordable housing. We can even build structures or tiny homes, but we need the land. And so let's look at, creative solutions. Isn't there a way that possibly the city or the county could lease land for $1 a year? I mean, we did it for the homeless shelter when it first started. So there are ways to do this. And if there's empty buildings, or if the property can be given from the city or from the county to a local organization to provide the housing or the alternative shelter, the various things that have been talked about, I feel like that is in our community, and I agree with you. So let's focus on that and maybe have more of a voice to try and say these are the solutions we're looking for, and we know that these are more efficient, cost-effective, and they actually work.
Yeah,
and also, I think, Jennifer, a really important point in that, when people talk about housing for poor people or funding public housing or funding housing for the homeless, and there's this ooh, no, we don't, that's welfare, that's charity. We don't want to do that. This is our tax money. We worked hard for it. You know what? The home ownership program, which is also a housing subsidy, is $144 billion a year now. And at the time in 79, when the massive cuts started hitting affordable housing programs right before the advent of contemporary homelessness, the homeowners' housing subsidies was $44 billion a year. So over the same period of time that we've been wiping out funding for poor people in the form of affordable housing subsidies, we've tripled the housing subsidy program for homeowners to the tune of $144 billion a year. Whether it's a tax write-off or whether it's a direct grant, a subsidy is a subsidy is a subsidy. If you owe me $50, I tell you to keep it. I just gave you $50. If you ask me for $50 and I give it to you, I just gave you $50. Either way, it's the same exact thing for me. Yet we define housing as two separate categories of housing, totally not connected to each other. One run by the IRS, which is homeowner housing subsidy program, and the other run by HUD, which is poor people's housing subsidy program. And we treat them as if they're two totally disconnected issues, and yet they're exactly the same thing.
That's an excellent point, Paul. I think we're at the point here, maybe I'd pause and kind of go, is there anything that you'd like to expand upon, Jennifer, that we've talked about, or maybe something they haven't talked about that you'd like to listeners to hear?
I do think it's important to, again, talk about these alternative solutions that, people say, well, there's these ordinances and these laws are just one of the tools in our toolbox, but it's the only tool we ever seem to use, and it's a hammer. So let's focus on truly the other tools that we have. And I also want to say that I thought this was really telling at the city council meeting when this ordinance was approved. Right before this ordinance, there was a report on the CDBG housing report, which is, federal money that comes in that we get to use locally, talking about where the money went, what it was spent on, and the goals for the next 5 years. And for the next 5 years, there were 14 affordable units projected to be produced in Chico in the next 5 years. And then the next topic we talked about was this ordinance. And I'm like, whoa, let's go back to what we just said. That is completely insufficient for our community, that we are budgeting for 14 affordable units of housing. And that is what I feel like, let's spend an hour talking about that versus an hour talking about this ordinance.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that, because I told someone this story yesterday. I was out in front of City Council a couple of years ago, and they had this group of folks that were picketing about do not build low affordable housing in our communities. It was outside of City Council. It was like 10 of them. And this one guy says, can you take a picture of me with the flags? I put my camera up to take it. And this one lady comes up to me and she grabs my camera and she threatens me. And I'm like I kind of back up. But the thing that was cool about that whole exchange, I actually stood there on the corner and watched these people. And I'm going, oh my God, this is really a scary, angry crowd of people that are just beating up on people that can't find housing. So there's this whole undercurrent that we don't talk about. There's a lot of people out there that don't want to build affordable housing in the communities. What would you say to that, Paul?
What would I say to that? I'd say there was a lot of people that didn't want black folks to live in their neighborhoods. And eventually they were told, too bad. Everybody's equally deserving. And if homeowners are deserving of $144 billion in housing subsidies, sure as hell, poor people are deserving of that as well.
And one analogy that I've heard used is similar to cars. It's that, we have Hyundais, we have Fords, and we have Escalades, and we have Mercedes, but we all can't drive the Mercedes, but yet for our housing, that's the only type of housing we're producing is the Mercedes. Well, we need a variety here, and we can't all afford the Mercedes. So why is that okay for housing?
The point of the Right to Rest Act, which was introduced in the last session by Senator Lieu in California, we had it in Colorado and Oregon as well, but in the California bill, all we're trying to do with the Right to Rest Act is say, don't criminalize life-sustaining activities for anybody, that sitting, standing, and sleeping are not criminal offenses and can no longer be classified as such by local governments. And that's how we're going to address it. If we can't use our jails and our police to make people that scare us disappear, or to make people that we see as others than us disappear, then we can start dealing with the racism and the classism that's behind all this in the first place. And then housing for all people would be equal and shared equally.
That's awesome, Paul. I'd ask the same question I had to Jennifer. Is there anything you want to expand upon or add that we might not have talked about yet, Paul, before we end?
I just would encourage people to go to our website. We use our website as an information source, not as a bells and whistles and look at us and how cool we are. And we document the hell out of everything that we say. And we have the research from law schools and other universities to back up what we say, and it's all there. And there's one big icon for the Without Housing campaign, which talks about the cuts to affordable housing and the advent of contemporary homelessness in the early 80s, and why that we need to address that if we hope to solve this issue. And the other that is the Right to Rest campaign, the Homeless Bill of Rights campaign, that talks about our bills and campaigns and how people can get involved.
Your site's wonderful. There's only 2 sites, and I do an awful lot of work in this area. There's only 2 sites I follow judiciously, yours and I Have a Name. And I repost and I re-message the stuff that you do, because that RAP website is awesome. It's raphome.org, is that what it was?
Raphome.org, yeah.
If I could just put a plug in, too, for the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty.
Yeah,
they also have fabulous materials, and they have great reports on the criminalization of homelessness. They have great model policies about alternatives, about affordable housing programs, and also, talking about the legal challenges and some of the constitutional problems that many of these ordinances could be facing. So I think that's a great resource as well.
Yeah, I want to second that. They're an amazing resource, and we've used their national reports, working with Eric and Tristia and Maria and them, to really use those as organizing tools in our communities, and got Berkeley to do a California version of that report, going really in-depth in local communities in California. Seattle University for the state of Washington, Denver's doing it. Really, a lot of schools are looking at that report and saying, okay, how do we use this in local communities to address this issue?
Bingo. It'd be really cool if we could get back together, just the 3 of us again in like 3 years, and have a totally different radio show about, oh my gosh, they're building affordable housing.
Look at all this housing.
Look at the housing now. Yay! Because I really prefer to tell the positive stories and just kind of shedding light on what's a really ugly issue. And I think both of you folks have really helped to do that today. And I appreciate you coming here and calling in, Paul Bowden, on your vacation.
Yes, you're more than welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to call in and meet Jennifer.
Thanks, Paul. It was great to talk to you.
All right, folks. Take care.
Take care.